Hey all, you know who it is. Today we're going to do Threefold Section 4, Part 6. Hugo walked with Chiyoko. She grabbed a hold of his arm, linked his with hers, and led him where she wanted him to go. Since you're new in town, Chiyoko said, I thought the place you might get a kick out of would be the Yavera Bazaar. It's got a little bit of everything from all over Lunastra: food, clothes, and weapons. Everything. I'm all for food, Hugo said. Don't mind checking out clothes. Not a big fan of weapons, though. Really? Chiyoko said. Why not? Weapons make it too easy for people to make a mistake, Hugo said. I can trust my own hands more than I can a weapon. I use weapons sometimes, Chiyoko said, and I think you're wrong. A weapon is an extension of you. Your hands can be as dangerous as any sword, gun, or axe. You should know that. True, Hugo said, but it's easier for people to do more harm, damage, when they're emotionally compromised with a weapon than without one. I see where you're coming from, Chiyoko said, but I believe the use of a weapon teaches people a lot. Basically, depending on the weapon and how a person uses it, it can be a benefit rather than a detriment. I'll admit it, Hugo said, you make a good point. Chiyoko pulled him past the metal gate and under the Yavera Bazaar sign. People were everywhere. They saw them coming and appeared to be a sight to see. Some of the people did them the courtesy of moving out of their way. Others didn't. Hugo couldn't pay them much attention, though, because with Chiyoko pushing people out the way, the sight of grilled and fried delicacies and the smells of different types of tea, he felt like he had reached cloud nine. Too much was going on, and he wanted to take it all in. She stopped and looked around for a moment. She was searching for something, and apparently she found it. She pulled him to a booth that sold regular weapons as opposed to Energist weapons. She picked up one of the small shurikens. There were larger ones on the back wall, which caught Hugo's eye. The artistry and craftsmanship drew his attention. You see this? Chiyoko asked. It's small, light, and dangerous. You're right. In the wrong hands, it could easily kill a person. But in the right hands, it teaches a person to focus and concentrate. It teaches them to stay their actions until absolutely necessary. It's a tool when your hands aren't enough, or a friend when you find yourself in a situation that's too much for you. You're passionate about this, Hugo noticed. Is there a story behind it? No, Chiyoko said. She placed the shuriken back on the table. Weapons get a bad rep, I think. They do cause trouble. I understand why you'd want to keep them out of your hands, but I also know they have a major impact on people. They have the ability to turn fights into tests of skill. They make all the violence less senseless and more sophisticated. I've always thought the exact opposite, Hugo said. Everything has its pros and cons, Chiyoko said. You've given me some stuff to consider, Hugo said. He looked from her and rested his eyes on one of the large, intricately made shurikens. He smiled before a bit of a commotion drew his and her attention. Let's see what that's about. She pulled him along. She let him go and jogged toward the commotion. He jogged after her. Try to keep up, she shouted back to him as she made it through the crowd. Excuse me, Hugo said. Pardon me. He smiled as he passed by individuals and groups of people trying to catch back up to her. Eventually, they came to the center of the bazaar. They worked to catch their breath. They leaned on each other. She wrapped an arm around his waist, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They laughed. This is the common area, Chiyoko said when she could properly breathe again. She took his hand and pulled him through the crowd to the front of the commotion. Usually, people trade goods here, but mostly they trade rumors and information. It's also a nice little place to sit and relax after shopping. Good place to people watch. The crowd focused on two people, a young man and a young woman who stood on a bench talking to them. Hugo and Chiyoko had a hard time hearing them even though they were relatively close because the crowd shouted over them. These two are regulars, Chiyoko said. They've been coming here for years. Do they usually cause such an uproar? Hugo asked. No, Chiyoko said. They're usually well received. They're cousins, Blue and Green McDowell. They travel all over the world and stop through here from time to time to give traveling tips, spread treasure hunting rumors, and tell the latest rumors and info on the grapevine. Sounds like an interesting pair, Hugo said. They're awesome, Chiyoko said. He heard the excitement in her voice and saw the starry look in her eyes when she looked their way. But they can't ever stay too long. He could tell she admired them. Because the townspeople might get like this? In a word, Chiyoko said, yes. Many townspeople find them entertaining, but they don't want them influencing any of the young folk in the town, Hugo said. Exactly, Chiyoko said. Have they overstayed their welcome? Hugo said. I don't think so, Chiyoko said. This looks pretty serious. It sounds crazy, the young woman shouted, but it's so crazy it must be true. The cousins were Gateran. Hugo spent enough time at Gatera to know the people when he saw them. That's Blue, Chiyoko said. Her cousin's Green. Blue's long platinum blonde hair reached down to the middle of her back. She pulled off her wristband and used it to put her hair in a ponytail as the conversation with the crowd got more intense and out of hand. Her dark brown eyes pleaded with the crowd. Green's short, jagged auburn hair and sky blue eyes masked the intensity of his character, but only for a moment. His cousin stood 2 heads above him, but his angular facial feature and the fierceness of his eyes made it apparent he was all too happy to be her blood knight. While Blue was dressed to the nines, Green barely wore anything. Blue wore a beige hooded overcoat on top of a yellow chiffon top, with layers of chiffon on the short raglan sleeves and across the bust, leading to a pleated rosette and waterfall frill. She matched a short brown denim skirt with a pair of beige shorts underneath it, and laced up knee high boots with legume hues. Green wore nothing but a pair of brown leather gloves, a pair of hiking boots, and a pair of tattered white shorts, stained by dirt and blood. She's right, Green said. There are beasts attacking cities, towns, and villages all over the world. They drop down in place and destroy it. We haven't seen them for ourselves. We've only met a few survivors. This couldn't be something made up. Not to mention Nomad, Blue said. We heard they're a group making moves around the world too. People are leaving their homes, their families, to join their cause. And although we don't know their cause, if it's this under wraps, we don't imagine it's anything good. Stop spreading your lies, an old woman shouted at her. Do not try to sow discord in our lives, a young woman instructed. Think of our children, a young man instructed. Get out of here, an elderly man shouted. Hugo recognized him from earlier. Green looked like he might erupt like a volcano any moment now. They've got it out for non-energists, he shouted. Apparently he didn't appreciate the disrespect toward them, especially his cousin. He only managed to rile up the crowd even more. We're trying to warn you about Nomad. We didn't want to say anything, Blue said, but all of you could be next. Blue's sudden outburst not only surprised her cousin and Chiyoko, but the crowd too. She quieted everyone down. Blue jumped down from the bench and walked off, leaving the common area. Green glared at the crowd before he jumped off the bench after her. Hugo watched after them. His thoughts were on beasts attacking places around the world and a group called Nomad with their sights on non-energists. Do you believe them? Chiyoko asked, bringing him from his thoughts and drawing his attention. The beasts are a hard sell, Hugo said, but a group against non-energists sounds plausible. I was thinking the same thing, Chiyoko said, but I'm inclined to believe both their stories. They're good people. They wouldn't spread something like this if they didn't think it held some kind of weight. I don't like how the crowd treated them. Do you mind if we go talk with them? Not at all, Hugo said. I'm following you. Lead me. Chiyoko smiled. She blushed a little. She gave him a little shove before she jogged to catch up with Blue and Green. Hugo followed her. They caught up to Blue and Green, and Chiyoko stopped in front of them. Blue, Chiyoko said. Green. Chiyoko, Blue said. Chiyoko's appearance surprised the cousins. I'm sorry about all that, Chiyoko said. She and Blue greeted each other with a hug. It's nothing, Green said. We learned a long time ago your family provides about the only decent people in this town. He kissed her on the cheek. We're going to go grab our gear and head to the next town, Blue said. Please don't leave yet, Chiyoko said. Let me take you guys out. I don't want you two to leave this place like this. Blue and Green glanced at each other. Who's he? Blue asked after realizing Hugo stood beside Chiyoko. You've been busy since the last I saw you. Stop it, Chiyoko said, giving her a playful shove. He's just a good guy I met. I'm showing him around. Hugo. Hugo introduced himself and held out a hand. He shook Blue and Green's hand. We'll stay, Green said, but only because it's you. Besides, it'll give us a chance to interrogate your new friend. Make sure he doesn't mean you any ill will. I don't, Hugo said. Chiyoko rolled her eyes and smiled. He doesn't. I know, Green said. You have a good judge of character. I should know. I mean, you're in good with us, and we're good people. Blue smiled and shook her head. Don't mind my cousin. He hasn't been around people in a while. He's fine, Hugo said with an added smile. All right, Chiyoko said. We'll go to our usual spot. She turned to Hugo. It's a hidden gem for the more enlightened of this town. My cousin Hideki runs it. If you've got more room in your stomach, he's got dishes from everywhere. I think you'll like it. You're awesome, Hugo said, almost in a whisper. Chiyoko leaned on him and smiled before she turned around and walked from the bazaar. Hugo, Blue, and Green walked right along with her. All right, guys, that was part 6 and the last part of section 4. No, not the last part of section 4. Yes, the last part of section 4, sorry. It was the last part of section 4 called Hugo. Tomorrow we're going to start section 5, which is entitled Junyo. So I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll be back tomorrow. Have a good night.